The biggest change coming in Battle for Azeroth is not threat generation. Sad to say it, but some people are making way too big a deal about this, and it's no surprise. Something that seems like a bigger change than it is, and of course, whenever anything like this gets posted to Wowhead, people really do run with it. And of course, other content creators on YouTube have seemingly done the same. What a surprise. Anyway, so we're going to tell you guys the truth about what's happening here, tell you guys exactly what is to be expected and why it will not really change the way anyone plays the game. So first things first, Wowhead, they always do great stuff. They do a great job of cataloging the especially the beta content and any news around the WoW community. But this post is exceptional. This is probably the best thing I have read for them. Perhaps I'm just used to the normal data mining, the same stuff every day, but this is exceptional. Whoever made this, hats off. You did a very, very good job. So anyway, we're going to go through it, give full credit to these people, just read word for word, and I'll tell you exactly why this is something to be interested in and also why it is not. So anyway, in Battle for Azeroth, Blizzard has nerfed threat generation of all tank specs. A lot of people probably just stopped reading right there, but you should have kept reading. Tanks may have more problems holding aggro on secondary mobs when only using passive AoE, and may need to make good use of taunts and target swaps to keep secondary mobs off their allies. So this is a very important point, and this person has pointed this out immediately, and it's extremely, extremely important. So basically, what this person and everybody else should be thinking here is when you see this, you think, okay, so this just means that targets that I'm not putting my full damage into, I might lose threat on. So what should that mean automatically? It should automatically conjure an idea of, say, 20 mobs around one boss, and all I have down is death and decay, and I have blood boil, and the disease is rolling on them. I'm never hitting them with like exact damage. I'm never, meleeing them, especially now with the melee changes. These things are going to be a problem. These things are going to be a problem, but they're not going to be such a big problem that people are going to have to sit there and wait like people think. They're not going to change the way you play the game. Those are the big concerns. It's mobs that you're not actually attacking. And like I said, especially with the auto attacks, the changes with auto attacks is going to be a bigger deal than some people may think. But regardless, these are mobs that you're like if you're not focused on them, then they probably don't matter. Okay, so let's continue. Anyway. So here's exactly the difference, and I want to talk about these numbers. There's a very, very good math here that this person has put together. So how does threat work in Legion? A baseline, tanks generate 10 times more threat than DPS. So for example, if you're not, like maybe you're level 60 or 80 or something like that, you're doing about 10 times more threat than DPS. So that's great. That's plenty. At 10 times more, you should absolutely never have a threat problem. So on live Legion World of Warcraft, this should be a non-factor. Like you literally should never even think about threat, okay? However, with an artifact equipped, tanks can generate between 14 and 20 times more threat. Obviously, this person's tested this. I don't know why or how this is possible. I don't know why it would vary, but the point is that Blizzard just doesn't seem to care about it in Legion, right? If it's not even precise, like if you can't even figure out exactly why and how much threat tanks are doing, then clearly the mechanic doesn't exist. It's just not anything that anybody cares about in Legion. So that's kind of the mindset they have to go forward with, because that's going to really dictate how you approach this next part, okay? How does threat work in Battle for Azeroth? As a baseline, tanks will generate 4 times more threat than DPS. So obviously a massive nerf. This person is saying that it could be up to an 80% threat reduction, and that number is really scaring people. An 80% threat reduction from Legion, that scares a lot of people, and it's causing a lot of overreactions. But again, it's based on potentially doing 20 times more threat than DPS, as was said in the original part here about, whatever based it with the artifact. I don't know what this means. I really don't. I don't know how this is working, but like I said, just think of it this way. Think of it in like a more broad sense. It's infinity threat. Now we have finite threat, okay? That's the only thing you need to worry about. You don't need to worry about how much less threat you're going to do than Legion. It's not going to affect you. It's not going to change the way you play the game, okay? And I'm going to tell you why. But anyway, the thing that is important here is they're saying that, and once again, an embellishment, frankly, is an embellishment. But of course, it is a big threat reduction, no matter what. Maybe not 80%, but it's going to be substantial, okay? For the comparison there, the skittish affix currently reduces threat by 75%. So skittish has already existed. So yet another example where I say, if you think this is a big deal, you haven't been playing the game. Guess what? it's true this time. It's usually a generalization, but it's actually true. If you have not done the skittish fix, then you don't understand why this is not a problem. This already exists once every 12 weeks or whatever it is in Legion 5-mans. And people get along fine. They have no problems keeping threat. You know what I mean? So the big thing that you need to think about here is this would only be a massive change to the game if they changed how tanks did damage. All right, that's the biggest thing to consider. So he's got some examples, or she or whatever has some examples. It shows this. This is really good. This is going to be in the description. I would really recommend you reading this. But here's an example. This is a really good one. If a DPS deals 16k damage, they will receive 16k threat. While in Legion, a tank receives about that much. So that's obviously a huge inflation. Now they're only going to receive 64k threat. Still substantially more. So basically what you'd have to be... So in order for this person to be dealing... So if you did 1k damage, you would get 1k threat. But the other person is going to deal, 4k threat. So that would mean that you would effectively have to be dealing 4 times more damage than the tank to be pulling threat. And that can certainly happen in burst windows. That can certainly happen on the pull. That could be happening even in the middle of pulls, especially in raids, where you're kind of focusing less on damage and your own survival as a tank. But in general, the big difference between this and the old days, like Classic and TBC, is that the tank did about 4 times less damage than the damage dealers. And that's no longer true in Battle for Azeroth. The tank does not do 4 times less damage than the damage dealers. In fact, it's probably less than 2 times now at this point. On average, on most fights, I'm finishing over 1 million, and most of our damage dealers are finishing over 2 million. But some of these are outliers, right? So it's like, on average, it's a little less. It's like about 1.9 times the threat, or the damage difference, right? So it's not really a problem, you know what I mean? If we do exactly as we do in Legion, in Battle for Azeroth, you won't even notice the threat has changed, okay? So I would really encourage you guys to chill out with the whole, there's been a ton of posts. I should have made this that type of video. There's been a ton of posts on the forums about people saying like, well, I guess I'll never do group content again with pugs and all this. It's like, relax. You know what I mean? But one way or the other, the change is being made. Yet another on a long list of things that is trying to bring the game closer to the old days. And it's all about pacing. It's all about actually caring about the mechanics of the video game. Whereas currently, like I said, threat is effectively infinite. You can't possibly lose threat as a tank in Legion. It's almost impossible. And if you do it right in BFA, it's going to be almost impossible as well. Because this is a very important thing, okay? So, in Battle for Azeroth, taunt multiplies the threat gained by the tank by an additional 5 times for the taunt duration. This is consistent to how taunt works in Legion. Now, it's not actually, because in Legion, I think it's 4 times. I thought it was 3 times, but I'm pretty sure we looked at it on the live stream yesterday and it was actually 4 times. So one way or the other, this was buffed. It's definitely buffed. I just don't know exactly by how much. So anyway, taunt multiplies the threat gained by a tank by an additional 5 times for the taunt duration, which is not very long, okay? But this is an incredibly important difference here between, again, this and the early days. In the early days, taunt only generated, it would top you off. You would go to the top of the threat chart, no matter what, okay? So basically, a good strategy back in the day was to let your Rambo DPS, your guys who would go like full ham, let them get crazy threat on a mob, tank it for like 2 seconds, and then taunt it off them, and then you would have surpassed their threat by a mile. You'd never have any problems. So that was, the thing that perpetuated this taunt cycle, where you would constantly, just keep rising up the chart, and then the damage dealers would have completely been dwarfed by that. That happened a lot in Wrath, but it wasn't possible in the early days. And then we eventually get to the point now where it's like you couldn't even possibly lose threat anyway, but even if you did, taunt generates an enormous amount of threat. So this is how you deal with skittish. On a boss, in skittish, you just taunt, and now you'll have threat for the rest of the pull. Like, it's pretty much impossible to lose threat. So guess what? You're going to do the exact same thing in Battle for Azeroth. You're going to have to actually use taunt to generate extra threat, but if you do so, you will literally, I think it would be impossible. You'd have to go AFK. If you taunted and did some burst in that 3-second window, whatever it is, 4 or 5 second window, you cannot lose threat. You will have then, there's an example of it here. Apparently there's still high threat abilities in the game. I'm talking about Heroic Throw, Throw Glaive. Blood DK does not have one of these. I think most tanks do not, but it doesn't even matter. So yeah, this person is basically saying that if you actually taunted and used one of these high threat abilities, you would then have, look at the enormous amount of threat that this person has generated. So what that means is that if you play right, it's going to be extremely easy. But if you play poorly, it's going to be, yeah, you're going to actually struggle with threat. But this is not going to, like, I don't know, there's people who think that you're going to have to, like, start CCing mobs again. So the reason, so this is the second part that I wanted to talk about in this video. The reason that is never going to happen again, okay? The biggest difference between this, the current thing that we're discussing, and the old days of Classic and TBC, is the availability of damage and different types of damage, okay? So in Classic and TBC, you'll have a situation where tanks basically have no access to either one. So two tanks, bears and warriors, have extremely limited access to AoE. And bears, you know, it's debatable because they have swipe, but regardless, they have limited access to AoE, to like spread out AoE, especially especially burst AoE, okay? And then it's the opposite for paladins. That's all they really have is burst AoE. Consecrate, you know, and then the TBC Consecrate plus wings plus spell power gear, they're going to be able to do a lot of burst. But compared to a warrior, they're going to not necessarily do as much single target. Definitely not the case as much in TBC, but in Classic, that's how it goes. Tanking as a paladin is effectively just lashback holy damage plus consecrate. That's it. You have really no burst, a single target threat like a warrior that you could actively apply over and over again to generate a lot of threat. So that is the thing about the early days. You did not have the capability of keeping all of these mobs on you the entire time. But of course, you know, a paladin did because of the lashback damage and consecrate. So that's what made them such great dungeon tanks. Whereas warriors, you'd have to tab through them. And that's what everybody remembers is warriors, because, you know, people have such focused, you know, closed minds on this that they can't possibly remember that there were other tanks playing the game at that time. So if a warrior was tanking a 5-man at equal gear levels as, like, say, a geared mage, you know, like a equally geared mage or warlock, he's going to have threat problems. He's not going to be able to keep 4 mobs on him easily. He's going to have to distribute his focus. You know, it's gonna dilute the threat across all 4 mobs. Whereas if there's only 1 mob, he's not gonna have any problems with it at all. It's gonna be extremely easy. He could even taunt to, like I said, cap him out if somebody does pull. Another big problem back in the day was taunt was a melee ranged ability, or at least very short. I'm pretty sure. I think it was melee, but people have debated me. I never figured it out. But anyway, I'm pretty sure you had to be right next to the mob to taunt it. So that's another big difference in Legion. That is going to completely, you know, you just chill out. You're not going to have these problems. You're going to be able, if something does run off to a mage, you can just taunt it. You know, you don't have to be right next to it. You don't have to be chasing it. It's not going to be a big deal. But what this will do is it's going to change the way damage dealers have to approach things. They're going to actually have to care about this. And like I said, if you do it right, you won't have to care about it that much. But if you don't, you know, like if, for example, you constantly are running through a dungeon and you're ahead of the tank, you're pulling stuff instead of the tank, you're going to get threat. You know what I mean? You have to let, now the tank has to actually get threat. And with also, you know, the changes to AoE like Consecrates and D&D, these abilities do way less damage. So you're going to have to, you know, you're going to have to at least give him as many globals as you're using yourself. You can't possibly go 3-4 globals ahead of him and expect that he will then have threat on all these mobs. It's not realistic. So it is going to change the pacing of dungeons. And with that in mind, damage dealers are going to die. You know what I mean? If you pull threat on 4 mobs and they get to you, you're going to die. You know what I mean? But that doesn't mean like, okay, stop. There's no possible way the tank could get threat on those 4 mobs. So we have to CC that one, and then we have to CC that one. It's like, it's not how it's going to go. Okay, so relax. You're all right. Still going to do the same thing. And if these people pull threat, then it's their fault. So that's what I say in skittish weeks, right? You know, like, it's, you try to do your best as a tank. And I do a lot of DPS. Let's put it that way. As a Blood Death Knight, especially in the situation I'm in right now, I do a lot of damage. And I focus on that a lot in dungeons because, you know, the current model of Blood Decay is such that I don't need to worry about myself very much. Happens, but it's infrequent, you know, and even in raids it's the same way. So I try to maximize my damage because that's the thing that I could bring the most to the group that would elevate our potential of defeating the encounter. So if you're not doing that, which a lot of tanks, and especially healers, but that's a different video, a lot of tanks are not focused on that because they're stuck in this mindset, this kind of like legacy mindset where, oh, the tank doesn't care about damage. Well, this isn't 2004, man. The tank really should, and even in 2004, you should, anyway, you should always be trying to be the best version of you as possible. And if you're doing that you're going to succeed. And if you're not doing that, then you're paying to play a game. Why not, why not do it? Let's elevate our play. Let's try to be the best we can be. And if we do that, it's not going to be very hard to worry. Threat will not be a concern at all. But what will be a concern is kiting. Okay, this is the final thing that I want to bring up today. And I think something that, again, people are overlooking, not realizing why. I think this is actually why this change is happening. People are, debating why. And like I said, I've speculated too, of course, saying that the game is trying to go back to a classic mindset in pretty much every facet. This is yet another instance of it. But this is probably the major reason. And if you guys watch the MDI or see the top teams, do 5-mans constantly, you're going to see a lot of kiting. And it's not the kind of kiting you may be used to. So, for example, in the old days, people used to kite, even in challenge modes, people used to kite mobs. And it was because the tank could not survive the damage that the mobs were doing. So it's kind of similar to how people used to CC, right? So if you used to CC in dungeons, well, now instead you might kite. It's kind of the same principle. It's like, okay, we can't possibly survive this pack for whatever reasons. Maybe they do dangerous casts, or it's going to be difficult to get them all grouped up, or the tank isn't going to have enough threat. Whatever expansion we're discussing, there's some benefit for CCing in 5-mans. Well, instead, in like as you moved up in the world, things got better for the game's 5-man progression. Kiting, basically directing off the tank. So Blood DKs were really good at it in WoD and MoP as well, with Dark Army of the Dead, whatever it was called. Yeah, you know what I mean. Where it summoned all the ghouls, they would taunt. That was effectively kiting. Something other than the tank that we don't care about would taunt and would keep threat for the entirety. Okay, so like I said, we've already done this every expansion. This is the same principle's always been there. But the reason people do it now, this is different than the reason people did it in WoD and prior, okay? The reason people do it now is not because the tank can't survive the damage. For the most part, the tank should have no problem surviving the packs that they're tanking. In fact, a lot of the times when I kite, I could probably solo the pack easily, but everybody else would die. You know what I mean? And you lose time, obviously, when other people die. Who knew? So the reason you're doing it is because it kind of like bugs out the mobs. I'm not really sure how to describe this, but if you've never seen it done in dungeons, basically, if the mob is too far away from its target, it can't do anything else other than run at its target. Now, this isn't necessarily the case for things that might target its allies. So, like a mob, like in Halls of Valor, a very common kite pack, especially on teaming, stuff at the top of the stairs right before you enter the proper halls. There's a lot of mobs, a lot of Thundercallers. Those mobs are extremely dangerous, those Thundercallers. So if you run away from them and you're like so far away from them that they can't possibly like get anywhere close to you, they can't cast anything either. They're going to just run the whole time. So they're basically no longer mobs. They don't do the thing that makes them dangerous. But the healers in those packs, they are still in range of other targets to heal. So they're still going to heal. So that's the difference. But regardless, it's kind of a side thing there. So anyway, the reason people don't just stand there and tank those mobs is because those mobs are not controlled in a way that they can kill their enemies extremely easy. You can't interrupt all of those things. And the way people used to deal with this was with AoE blanket stuns. All right, so you'd bring 3 specs. You'd have a 5, a 3, and a 1 second AoE stun. And by the time that 8 second gap, 8 or 9 second window there would end, the mobs would be dead. That's how you dealt with large damaging, like high damage trash in MoP and WoD challenge modes. Now they deal with it this way, where they just run away from the mobs. You literally don't get, like, the mob cannot even do anything other than run. And you facilitate this with things like slows. Sacrilege from Warlocks is extremely strong as well. All of these things are going away now, especially with the threat changes. I really do feel like kiting is going to either completely change or it's going to be impossible. So what this does in my mind is it incentivizes bringing hunters and maybe rogues more. We talked a little bit about this. Hunter in our guild said that misdirect can actually work up to 100 yards away from the... he said it's from him. I thought it might be from the target, but he said it's from him. So as long as he's max range and you're running by him, he could misdirect a lot of damage over the course of maybe like a 10-second window, however long it would take for me to get over 100 yards away from him. And like I said, or like he said, marksman has such a long range that you would effectively get like a 150-yard berth away from the mobs before you would be out of range of him. So I don't know if that's true or not. I never play really a hunter with, especially focusing on misdirect, so I don't know. But if that's the case, then maybe kiting still has a hope. But I think that is probably the root of these changes. You know, it's kind of weird to be watching these people do extremely hard keys and they're never doing any damage to anybody. The mobs, that is. You're just kiting the whole time. It's basically turned into the meta. It's like if the tank can't kite, then you can't bring him. And that's at the highest level of play. That is not how most people do 5-mans. Not certainly, I don't enjoy it. It's fine. It's whatever. I don't really enjoy it, especially without a warlock. I think it's a huge waste of time. But regardless, it's something that the highest element of play has demanded, and it's effectively going to be reduced in huge efficacy here, all because the tank won't be able to keep threat if he's 100 yards away. You know, it should be pretty obvious. No matter how much burst damage you do, you would have to do now only 4 times more damage than the damage dealers. So if you're away from the mobs for 4 times the amount of time that you were near the mobs, then the damage dealers would pull threat, right? Does that make sense? So if you're in the vicinity of the mobs for 10 seconds and then you're away for 40 seconds, you would have completely lost threat. No matter what, no matter how much damage you did, that's just how it's going to go. And that would be even worse if you're not doing as much damage as we're assuming you're doing. So anyway, yeah, like, you know what I mean? Like that, it would be equal if you did the same amount of damage as the damage dealers, but if you did less than the damage of the damage dealers, it would be even worse. So anyway, that's, yeah, whatever. I don't know, but I think that's the biggest problem. I think that's what this is going to change. So, you know, all these people out there who are saying that, like, this is going to, you know, change the game, it's going to ruin the game, whatever. Like, guys, please, just use your brains. That's all I ask, man. This community sometimes, and especially some of the people at the face of this community, you know who I'm talking about. These people really confuse me at times, and I really wish we had better representation. So anyway, thanks for watching. That's my rant on threat. Maybe there'll be changes in the future. If there is, we'll make another video. But TLDR, again, if you made it to the end, let me know. You guys are awesome. If you're watching this whole video, it's not that long. Not as long as the previous. But anyway, that's that. We'll see you guys in the next one. TLDR is that this will not change the way anybody plays the game. You will not have to CC. You will not have to worry about anything else. You'll just have to make sure that your damage dealers are not pulling ahead of the tank. And if they are, it is their fault. You let them die. They will learn the lesson very quickly, and you will not have to worry as a tank. So do not worry about that. The only people who now have to worry are people who do kiting on pretty much every single pack in dungeons. So I would like to hear if any of you guys out there know or are serious, like really serious. I guess maybe Faxi has input, but anyway, if anyone out there is really serious about dungeons and they do a lot of kiting in their dungeons, tell me how you think this might change that. So anyway, thanks for watching. We will see you guys in the next video.